Good evening. This is Kathy Mulchin, and I'm here for the League of Women Voters of Greater Peoria, and in conjunction with the Fond du Lac Library District, are pleased to present tonight's forum. To my far left is Thomas Dry, the Executive Director of the Peoria County Board of Elections, and near to me is John Ackerman, the Tazewell County Clerk. This evening, we are going to be discussing redistricting after the most recent census. Both gentlemen have brought some maps here tonight so that they can explain to you and you can see exactly what has happened. And so I'm going to start this off first, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ryan if he would start.
Sure. I brought two maps tonight. I've got one that's the county board districts that were redrawn by the county board. They take effect for the election coming up in the primary and in the general election. So we stayed with 18, but those had to be reconfigured based on population. And then I brought a precinct map for Peoria County. This is actually drawn based on registered voters. And there were significant changes in this. Peoria County went from 169 to 116 precincts. We were able to increase the size of the precincts in a lot of parts of Peoria County because there was a change in the law that allowed the number of registered voters in a precinct to go up to 1,200. So there was some significant changes on the number of precincts. That was the biggest thing we did redistricting wide. The state did a lot of things redistricting. They did increase the number. We now have 4 state senate seats instead of 2, and we have 6 state representative districts as opposed to having 3. So we've doubled all those. But on the local level, the biggest change was the precincts. We did have changes to the county board, and District 150 redrew their maps, so there was some changes to District 2, which is having an election on the primary in June.
And Tom, what about the national elections? Are there any changes as far as?
This is live TV, right?
Yeah.
And we thought that was going to be so.
Sorry about that.
As far as the district changing for national election for the.
So the congressional districts, the biggest change there is there were some movements in the line, but we stayed with 2. They just really are renumbered. We had 17 and 18. Now it's 16 and 17 in Peoria County.
And did those lines change at all?
They did. They changed. I think the easiest way is some of those lines moved north in Peoria County. Is probably the easiest way to describe it.
Okay.
So I don't unfortunately have good maps yet. John will understand it. We don't have real good maps from the state yet, so we're still working on that. All this was condensed in a very short period of time. So.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, in Tazewell County, I didn't bring a county board map because our county board districts remain the same. We'll still have 3 districts, the exact same alignment that was previously the board stuck with. For precincts, we did have major changes, but that map has been well publicized and is available on our county clerk website for everybody to look at. And more importantly, it's on all the new voter registration cards that went out. So if you had a recent voter registration card that went out this past week, make sure you take a look. That information's on there with the new polling locations and precincts. Like Tom mentioned, we took advantage of the new state law that allowed for larger precinct sizes. So they grew quite a bit, which reduced our number from 102 to 82, which will come out to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of savings for the taxpayers by reducing the amount of precincts and the amount of polling locations. So we're very excited about that change. As far as our congressional maps, we've always had 2 congressional districts for recent history in Tazewell County. If you lived in the former 17th district, there was that one around Pekin and the southern part along the river of the county. If you lived in the rest of the county, you were in the 18th. Well, the 18th is no longer here. So everybody that was 18 is now 16. And if you were 17, you're probably not 17. If you were, you're not it now because it really changed where it shifted. and then came along the bottom side of the county. So everything south of Hopedale, south of Minear, this is all in the 17th district now, up through Dillon, Delavan, up through then along the river, but only a little bit of the city of Pekin now is still in that 17th district. So quite a bit of changes on the congressional map, while we still just stick with 2 districts, the boundaries change. When we go to the state districts.
John, before we leave that, maybe,
Yes.
can you explain a little bit how you explained to me about the black lines and what they run through? Some of them.
Oh, there's a funny story. So we prefer in elections that the state, not that they ask us, but it's easier for us that have to put these maps together if they go by a property line or by, more preferably, down the street, or like in this instance, a township line, because that's easy for us to set. What I found funny was the state set this one along a creek. So they picked a farmer's ditch creek and said that that was the boundary line. It is what it is, but farmer's ditch creeks change every time it rains. So while this is the line, and that's what the line's going to be, in a decade, that might not be where the creek is at. The creek may be somewhere else, and we'll wonder why there was this squiggly line. A little factoid, if you take a look at the state of Illinois, you will notice that there is a chunk of the state of Illinois south of St. Louis, Kaskaskia, that is in Missouri. That's because the Mississippi River changed its course after the state line was made, and the Mississippi moved, where a piece of it is now trapped on the Missouri side of the river. So those type of things happen when they set them on bodies of water that can move, and especially when they're a farmer's creek like this is. That's something we'll laugh about for a few years to come. So for the state maps in Tazewell County, we had 2 state representatives and 2 state senators in Tazewell County. We will now have 4 state senators and 5 state representatives. So 1 district will come over here along Pekin, Cincinnati, Spring Lake, those townships. The other district will be Sand Prairie and Malone. That's another district. Another one, this is new, to the north of Washington. The north half of Washington and part of East Peoria is in 1 district. And the south side of Washington, the south, most of Fond du Lac, of East Peoria, sorry, and a little bit of Morton is all in another district along with the village of Deer Creek. And then the main part of Tazewell County is still within 1 district, but where this could be confusing, if you lived in Washington and Keith Summer was always your state representative, not only is Keith retiring, he won't be your state representative, but depending on where you live in Washington, you'll be in 2 separate districts, neither of which would be the district that Keith Summers would have been representing. So it will get very confusing. I think we're going to talk in a minute about the importance of voter registration cards, but I want to stress real quick while we're talking about it, look at your voter registration card, because that'll help you know exactly who you're voting for. Just because you think that that's who your representative was, as you've seen by these maps, it's changed drastically. For the state senate, the boundaries are exactly the same. This is in 1 district, this is in another, this is in the 3rd district, and the 4th one is a combination of these 2 districts here. So you will have this being 1 senate district again, this being in another senate district, a 3rd senate district, and then a 4th. So those are the maps for Tazewell County.
John, do you want to go ahead and show them a new voter
Yeah.
registration card? Talk about that since you were just talking about the district.
So our voter registration cards went out in the mail this past week. I believe Tom's went out, sorry, caught you right when you were drinking. I think,
Yeah, we mailed ours out at the end of March.
Yep.
Last week of March, and they're pretty much the same cards except they're yellow.
oh, you went yellow, perfect. Ours are this color, and all of our voter information's printed on there, your polling location. Polling locations did change. We changed those boundaries, those locations as well. So pull this card up, take a look at it, and it'll tell every Tazewell County voter exactly everything they need to know about all of their districts and all of their election districts that they need to know about.
Yeah, this is this pretty much the same layout. You'll have your information on your precinct. You'll have some of your districts, and you'll have your new polling place if it changed. We tried to limit the polling place changes, but when you reduce that number of precincts, you're going to have some changes in polling places.
One other thing I'd mention on it for us, we'd sent the cards out, I don't think Tom did, we sent them out right at the end of December, and they had, beginning of December, sorry, no, beginning of December, I was right the first time. They had on there all of your, congressional and representative districts, but they had the wrong polling information. So if you received a new card, like I mentioned, this past week, that's why, I just received one, we've had a lot of calls about that, causing some confusion. Your precinct information changed, and so did possibly your polling location. So that's why you received 2 cards in such a short period of time. There was the federal mandates and the state mandates for mailing voter registration cards out really hit each other smack in the face this year in tight time frames, and we chose to mail them out 2 separate times like that.
Before we switch topics and go to voting requirements, if anybody has any questions of either John or Tom about the redistricting, please, if you want to step up to the mic right here, feel free to ask, or if you have a loud voice like me, you can take from your seat.
I think just getting the questions off the table real quick, Tom and I aren't responsible for this, so don't blame us.
So John, one of the things you didn't mention about the 105th district that's going to make it very different is it picks up most of Bloomington and Normal.
Yes.
That's the population hub in that particular district, which is going to change, I think, the representation to a certain extent. I mean, we've got 4 candidates running right now in the Republican primary, but it's going to make it very different because they're going to be, they would logically be facing the most populous area.
Well, I think that was their intent.
Of course it was.
I think that was their intent. This is the district she's talking about.
105th.
Oh, the 105th. I'm sorry. I thought you were meaning the 91st. No. The 105th. Yes, that is true. That one only takes in a portion here and then goes all the way over to Normal. But it little misleading as well, though, that it does include all of Pontiac. It does take in some good-sized communities to the north. So I'm interested to see where that population comes in because they had to steal a lot of Bloomington Normal for the 91st, and that's the one I thought you were addressing. This district now ties all of the city of Peoria. And you can correct me where I'm wrong there, because you know your maps better than I do, but all of the city of Peoria pretty much, and
It covers the majority of the city.
majority, and then it comes down into Bartonville a bit and takes in some of Bartonville.
Well, okay, let me correct that. The 91st takes in very little of the city of Peoria. The Senate district.
Senate district does, yes. So that'd be the 46th, sorry. Yes, the Senate part of this district is 46. And then it comes over here and takes in just a little bit of Woodford, but really picks up the heart of Bloomington and Normal. So that's the one I think that they've made to be the tie between the 2 large communities. The problem there is just this district, the state representative 91st, there is a large amount of, while this looks like vacant farmland, there are a lot of country estates out there, large populated areas, and it's misleading when it looks like it's vacant. So I think the population actually is going to be, while it will still predominantly be a Bloomington district, I think this is going to still have a huge chunk, maybe as high as 35–40% of the district. Because after when this part of the 91st that comes into Peoria is just Bartonville, a section of the city of Bartonville. The rest of it, there's a large tracts here, all of the bluffs in Fond du Lac, a large part as you see there, Fond du Lac and Creve-Coeur, parts of Washington, between there and Morton, tight populated area. So I think the intent was to make it a Bloomington district and a Peoria district tied together with a Senate district, but I think the population, when we're done, is going to be a little different.
They're very different than they were before.
Yes, yes.
I don't want to shortchange Peoria. We have a precinct in 105, right up in the corner.
Right.
I want those.
Yeah.
So we have less than a precinct in the western part of the county, which has about 100 voters that comes over from. I think that goes all the way to Mississippi. So.
Crazy.
Could I ask you guys to talk a little bit more about the law that enabled you to go to larger precincts? I'm interested in, why did that happen now? How did it happen? I assume somebody sponsored a bill, and I'm really interested. You said it will save hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you could go into a little more detail about what those savings are, I'd like to know that.
So honestly, this was an initiative by the County Clerks Association to increase the size of the precincts. The desire was one of the issues is that we're trying to address how people vote. We're seeing fewer and fewer people vote on election day. Now, 2020, I think, is probably going to be an outlier for a while. But we had 65% of people in Peoria County had already voted before election day.
65?
65. I don't think we'll get there in this election, but we're moving in that direction. Where, you know, and if we get 50% of people have already voted before election day, we felt that we can make adjustments to the polling places on election day. It seems strange to treat those as if we're still expecting 97% of the people to vote on election day. So the Clerks Association had asked to increase the size to 1,200 to give us some flexibility in that and to address how we're voting as we go forward. I think also this probably sets us up as that transition happens and more and more people vote ahead of time, or at least a large percentage do. I think there's also some discussion and a possibility down the road that this will be an easier transition if we ever move to a vote center concept, which is the easiest way to describe a vote center is right now you can go to any early voting location. It would be the same concept on election day. We will have a vote center in each of these next elections. John and I are both doing it at our office, but there is, I think, a trend moving in that. So we're moving further and further away from the precinct voting, or at least we're trending in that direction. So the ask was to the state legislatures, why don't we start to let's treat these precincts a little different than we did in the past, because they're not the same concept. And we didn't actually reduce any polling places, but we had several that had 3 and 4, and now they have 1 or 2, but the same number of people are voting as the majority.
I think just echoing what Tom said, it's a reflection of how we are utilizing polling locations today. In Tazewell County, our numbers, in 2016, 82% of the voters voted on election day in the 2016 presidential election. When you move 4 years into the future to 2020, yes, it was a pandemic, and yes, that magnified, but it was a steady slide over those 4 years down this path of individuals using vote by mail and using in-person early voting, which is the predominant method in Tazewell County that individuals chose over vote by mail. But still in Tazewell County in 2016, our numbers dropped to 52% voting on election day. So he had 65% voting before election day. I had 52% on election day. That's still nowhere near 82% that we had just 4 years earlier in 2016. And like I said, that trajectory was a steady slide in that direction. So yeah, the cost for a polling location is the same, whether or not I have 52% of the people voting or 82% of the people voting. If we're down to half of that population, then we should increase the size of the population to make sure that we're getting maximizing the resources available there. And where the savings comes into effect is we actually lost several of our polling locations. We didn't need as many of them then, so we cut back. They're still extraordinarily close to individuals' homes. It's not like we moved them hundreds of miles away, but we were able to reduce or consolidate locations into one location. An example I'll bring up, you can see Delavan Township on that map right here. The city of, because of the prior precinct size cap, which was 800 individuals, I had to have 2 precincts, one for the north side and one for the south side of town. But they went to the same spot to vote. The thing is I have to get, instead of, because there's 2 precincts, I have to have 10 election judges. I can still use 1 set of equipment, that's fine. Then I have to have a minimum of 2 sets of ballots, one for precinct 1, one for precinct 2. You gotta print all those ballots, all that material, you have to send staff time to verify that the 2 different ones are accurate, and there's actually multiple different ballot styles in there, so each time you do that, it doubles. So if you're inside of town, it's 1, if you're out of town, it's another. Well, we just made it 4 now, instead of, now I can reduce down to 2, because we've put all of Delavan in 1 precinct. It didn't change anything for the voters, they were voting in the same spot. But now instead of 10 election judges, I need 5. I can take those resources and use them elsewhere where I don't have, where we were understaffed in election judges. One other thing I'll bring up to show, we didn't, when I talk about cutting back on election judges, really it was a budgeting factor. We were always budgeting for 5 and never getting 5 to be there because my pool of election judges is what it is. Well, now that I've reduced how many I need to have, I'm able to put 5 election judges in each one. The pool is still the same. It's just the demand on where they go is less. So I'm being able to fulfill getting 5 of them in each one. And we showed that in the last, during the 2020 election. There were numerous counties around us that had to close a polling location because they didn't have election judges that showed up on election day because of the pandemic. Well, when that happens, let's say that was all the way down Little Hill Township. They don't get to go to the next polling location. They've got to go to the county clerk's office or the election authority's office and vote. So they would have had to come all the way to Pekin to go vote. That's a major inconvenience. By reducing and being able to maximize how we utilize our election judges, we were able to keep every precinct open. We didn't have any closed. Now we're going to be able to do that again because we did a precinct districting right before the pandemic. Now we've done it again, we'll be able to utilize that again. And then on polling locations, when you cut back them, the equipment is expensive. We figured it's about $11,000 each election for each of the polling locations. I just cut 10 polling locations, I think 10 or 20. You know, do the math on that each election, how much that magnifies. And then you've got election judges, how much less we have to budget there. We're still have the same amount of people, but before I knew I wasn't going to fill them, but I still had to budget for them. Now I don't have to do that. There's just less staff time, everything just compounds, and it, believe it or not, it turns into hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're about to sign in a couple months a brand new contract with our election equipment provider, Liberty Technology Systems out of Tremont. And I'm anxious for that because I'm having him print up on purpose. What would it be like if Tazewell County was still at 135 precincts? Then we reduced down to 102. Now we're at 82. So that contract for 6 years, what would it look like? Everybody will be able to see clear as day. Contract A's, if it was 135, here's what the total is going to be. And now show everybody just how much we saved by reducing things. So in the next couple months, we're going to have that contract, we'll sign it, we'll release that information. And I think the public will be able to see once and for all just how much is saved by these steps we've taken to reduce our precincts in Tasman County.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I do want to add that maps, if anybody is interested, maps of the new state districts are available at www.elections.il.gov. Then click Find My Elected Officials. Do you have any other place for them to go find maps?
We have our local maps on the Peoria County GIS site, so peoriacounty.gov, and then our GIS site has, under a redistricting tab, has most of our new maps.
And we have them on our county clerk website as well.
Okay, at least so everybody knows how to find
Yeah.
them. Okay, since we're trying to keep this to an hour, we're gonna switch gears. Do you have anything that you want to talk about redistricting before we leave that area? Okay, now we are going to talk about voting requirements. And I want to throw out some deadlines here that we've discussed. May 28th is the deadline to register by mail. June 12th is the deadline to register online with the Illinois State Board of Elections. June 28th, which is the primary, is the deadline to register in person. And in order to register, you need 2 forms of ID, correct? Both with your name, one with your address. It can be a driver's license, utility bill, credit card bill. Any other forms of
The other
identification?
one has to be photo ID, right?
That does not have to
No.
qualify, but anything with an address, yeah.
Okay. So then to start about, voting in person can begin on May 19th, is that correct for the primary? Okay. And one of the things that we had discussed was, House Bill 1871, which was approved April 2nd of 2021. It allows election authorities to let a citizen who is temporarily or permanently disabled vote from their car on election day, monitored by 2 election judges. And I did not know, but they both have allowed this to happen. So whichever one of you wants to explain how long you've been doing this?
Sure, so there's always been a component of what was called curbside voting in the past. You were required to call ahead and do that. The need for curbside has shrunk quite a bit, I think, because we've gone to accessible locations now that there's no excuse to vote by mail. But we still had some people that did it. The last time we did really any number of this was actually in November 2020, and it wasn't a disability issue. We were dealing with people that had called in and said they tested positive for COVID. So we were delivering ballots to them in that situation because of the COVID. But yeah, I mean, if somebody really cannot get into the facility and they want to vote on election day, they do have the opportunity for this. Typically, it's called curbside voting.
The same, we've been teaching our election judges about it for the last decade, and it's something we didn't really utilize much until, like you said, COVID, because our facilities are ADA accessible. But with COVID, we found it the same way. Individuals that were quarantined could come to our facility inside their own vehicle, and we went out to handle it that way.
So why was there a need for this bill if you had already been doing this?
You're asking me why Springfield did something? I don't know. They may not have known it was in the bill. It was already in the statute. The language is a little different in how it's a little more structured in how it lays it out. And there may have been some concern that the other one just talked about curbside and didn't lay out requirements. But I think everybody was handling this the same way. We're sending 2 judges.
I guess you could argue that it was to promote the availability of it, to make people aware of it, bring it back up as a topic. But again, it's like Tom said, it's something that's been on the books for a while.
Okay. I know another thing that House Bill 1871 did was provide funding for secure collection sites for postage-free vote.
That's something that was in the last election bill, and it's something they carried over. So if you don't put enough postage, I'm worried, is it 1 stamp or is it 2 stamps? We won't reject your ballot when we receive it. The post office is required to deliver it to us regardless, and then the county will pick up the difference that is owed. It's an important point to mark, because if you're just putting it in the mail with no stamps, the county, the taxpayers, are flipping the bill to pay for that. So please don't abuse it. But if you are nervous, I'm not positive how many to put on, I want to make sure my vote counts, it will not be rejected because of that. So all election materials that we receive back, regardless of the state of the postage, will be accepted, and the post office will just send us the bill for how much is owed for that postage.
The other component on that is the secure drop boxes. And for the 2020 election, they allowed a drop box for the November election, specifically for that election. That bill, when it passed, was about 5 or 6 days before the election. So the drop box we'd installed for 2020, the lid came off, the block came off, and we were able to do that. But so basically, they made the use of drop boxes permanent in that bill. So.
Okay, so it's permanent.
Yes, yeah. The 2020 bill allowed the use for that in November, and then that next year, that spring, in the legislature, they passed it so you could continue to use drop boxes.
Now, we don't have drop boxes in Tazewell County still, Tom. I think we have 1 or 2.
We have 1, and we intend to add 2 more.
We don't have any in Tazewell County, but what I've done instead is we've turned every single one of our polling locations and our early vote locations into a drop box. So you don't have to wait in line. You just walk in, walk right up to an election judge, hand them your vote by mail ballot, and they will take it and put it to the side, and they will be brought to our office by those election judges to count. So it works as a drop box of its own nature when we've got polling going on at a location, or when we're doing early voting. But they're not physical drop boxes outside facilities in Tasman County.
Is the drop box that's in Peoria County is right there at the election commission, isn't it?
Yeah, we have 1 at our election commission, and the intent is to add 2 more. 1 in the downtown area of Peoria, 1 at the north end of Peoria. I don't have those locations finalized yet, so I don't want to say yes or no. But the intent is to have 2 more 24/7 drop boxes in Peoria County.
In addition to the drop boxes, if someone did bring in a mail-in ballot and handed it to one of the election judges, would that be sufficient, as John just described?
We haven't done the way John has done it, but we did have, in 2020, we had some small mobile ones at our early voting location. We haven't decided if we're gonna continue that or not. I will say this, they were very popular. In 2020, we got 40% of our vote by mail ballots through those single drop box in our office. And I know some other jurisdictions, I know Sangamon County got 60% through of their vote by mail ballots back through their 2 drop boxes. And that's a trend you'll see, I think, a lot of states that have gone to a lot more vote by mail. People wait till the last minute and then they don't trust the mail at the last minute, so they'll use the drop box. And I think they feel more comfortable doing it. So.
Okay. I'm going to switch a little bit here then over to Senate Bill 825 that was approved June 17th of 2021, provides that Election Day, November 8th, 2022, to be a state and school holiday. And I believe you told me this wasn't the first one.
No, they actually, 2020 was an interesting year. I'm sure everybody remembers that. They did make the general election in November a state holiday. When we say state holiday, understand that really it only seemed to affect the schools because most other local jurisdictions or entities didn't close for the state holiday, but it is a state holiday. This bill only does it again in November. I think we're moving towards they'll probably make that a permanent one. But that they changed the November one to a state holiday, which ironically, if you work for the state, it's a state holiday anyway.
But it's not a federal holiday?
It is not a federal holiday, yeah.
So you're still going to be able to see your post
Yes.
person, postal clerk to give them your vote. Okay. One of the other changes that we had discussed was it allows voters to apply for permanent vote by mail status, eliminating the need to do a ballot every election. And the election authority must notify the qualified voters no less than 45 days before the election of the option for permanent vote by mail status.
Well, the permanent vote by mail, the way that's worded is a little different. It's a little off-catching. We had to have a lot of clarification on it as well. The permanent vote by mail starts immediately, so anybody can call the offices and register now for permanent vote by mail. And what that does is instead of every election having to send in an application requesting that for a vote by mail ballot, we'll know ahead to mail you a vote by mail ballot. So you register once and it's good then until you notify the office otherwise. Now on that, you're gonna have to pick which primary style you want. I want a Republican, a Democrat, or I guess a third party if they qualify in your county ballot style. And that would be the one that gets mailed to you until you notify the office that you want it differently. So we didn't take any options away. You still have the ability to change. I want a Republican ballot this year. Next time I want a Democrat. You can still do that, but you have to, if you're on the permanent vote by mail, you have to notify the office, the election authority, to change your status on your permanent vote by mail card. Where it gets a little confusing is the mail notification you were talking about. That is only for the general election. So those do not have to be mailed out for the permanent, for the primary election. But in the general election, we will be mailing a notification to all voters notifying you that you have the right to vote by mail, and included on there will be the option to check for permanent vote by mail. And then you don't have to do this, but in Tazewell County, I will also be including on there the schedule for our early voting, off-site early voting opportunities in our communities. So what days will be in Washington, East Peoria, Morton, so that if you wanted to do off-site, in-person early voting, you will have the opportunity to do that as well. So that'll be on our notification card. We're only required to do the vote by mail and the permanent vote. I think that's probably all you'll have on yours.
Yeah, we've got, and actually, we've already started to receive them. We've mailed some permanent vote by mail applications out, and actually now you can we're within that 90-day window where you can request a vote by mail ballot for the individual primary. But we've started to mail out the applications, and we have an application on our website. When you go to the vote by mail application, it kind of separates you. Do you want just for this election, or do you want permanent? And the way ours is set up is under the permanent, you have two options. You can sign up for all general elections, or you can sign up for all elections. And if you do that, then you are required to basically select a party ballot for every election going forward. The same process if you want to change it, but we've got kind of a two-tiered level at that to start with on a permanent vote by mail. And we do intend to do, I like the fact that they call it a notification. We have about 122,000 registered voters. About 18,000 of those we have emails, and if you read the statute correctly, email is a notification. So we're gonna not mail those people a notification. Plus anybody who's already signed up for it won't be either. But that's a notification we intend to send out. We can start 90 days out, and ours will go out that day. So.
And I guess that law goes into the future, so every general election before, until the law gets changed, you will receive that notification of the ability to vote by mail and asking if you wanted to be on the permanent list. I don't know how Tom's gonna implement it, but we're implementing it where once you say that you wanna be on that permanent vote by mail list, we're not going to keep sending those notifications to you, so you'll come off the list because you've already signed the permanent list. What's the point of keeping sending you mail items? It's costly to the taxpayers and it makes no sense in the long run. So I don't wanna speak for you on that.
No,
That's how we're doing it.
We won't even send people that have signed it. If they happen to sign up before that first notification.
That's how we're doing it as well.
We're not gonna send them a
Yeah.
notification.
So once you're on there, you won't receive any other notification from either of our offices, once you're on the permanent list.
John, can Tazewell County voters also do this online, how Tom described, or is it something that is just by mail?
They can call in our office and do it there. I don't think, we do have the ability to do it online. I think they did add that, so yes, they can do it online as well.
So there's three ways, by phone, by mail, and online?
Well, if they do it by phone, they're just asking us to send them the application,
Oh, okay.
and we can send that to them so they can check that they want to be vote by mail, but, yeah.
And so if somebody, when you send this notification for permanent vote by mail status, what information does that person have to give you other than the address?
So they're, but
I mean, just to
ours are gonna go out, it's gonna look a lot like your voter registration card, and it's gonna have data on it. When you mail it back, you have a barcode, we're gonna barcode it in and then determine which way they did it, to try to cut down on the information that we have to enter in. But they have to make the decision if they want permanent vote by mail, and if they want all elections or just general elections. There's an affidavit they actually have to sign, that I do. The language is almost, the affidavit part's the same as it is for an application for one election or for all of them. It's just the determining part of permanent or not, or election specific.
And now in Tazewell County, the only difference would be, he's exactly right, the only difference we would have is we don't have that option of, I just want it for general elections or for all. For us, if you're on the permanent list, it's for all. We're gonna send it to you for everything.
Now, does this affidavit have to be notarized?
It does not. It's a signature application. The language on the affidavit part of it is the same. Almost, I think it's exactly the same as it is for just a specific election. And it's actually pretty close to the same application you would sign on election day or early voting. The language is all the same.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One of the other things that Senate Bill 825 did is that it requires election authorities to implement cybersecurity measures, including biennial risk assessments and monthly vulnerability scans. Who would like to address this first?
Well, I don't know if our citizens know enough about how blessed we are in Illinois that the Russians hacked us in 2016. Because it tipped off Illinois ahead of other states that this is an issue we need to take serious. We don't often talk about things I think that Springfield does correctly, but in this case I will say the state did this correctly. Illinois is the gold standard in the United States on election cybersecurity, and other states are now coming and asking, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And they're echoing it. It's a partnership that's been built by the State Board of Elections that ties the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, CIA, right into the local election authorities. So they're sending us information constantly on what they hear, what they know is coming, what they think's coming, how to prep, okay, this is how they're gonna attack, so, here's the safeguards you need to have in place. We're getting all of these notifications on a constant basis, and we have been for the last 8 years, 6 years.
Yeah.
And we've been updating our systems and securing them. And on the other side, so that's information coming down the pipeline. On the other side, when we see cyber attacks in our area, something in our office that's happened, which has happened, people attempting to break into our systems, we send that information immediately up the pipeline. Because if they're doing it in Tazewell County, they're going to repeat it in Peoria County. They're going to do the same thing in McLean County. So then the state sends out a notification. This is what they're seeing on a local county. Be on the lookout for this so that you're aware. So there's a wonderful network of information sharing. So most of the stuff that they put in this bill has already been in place because of the cooperation of all of the election authorities throughout the state of Illinois. One major one that's been added is that all election authorities are to be on .gov and .gov websites and .gov emails by June 17th. So we are all actively working, those of us that are not on .gov websites like Tazewell County's Outrun.com, we are actively working so that we will have everything switched over to a .gov site. And then they're going to start a campaign, I believe, it's my understanding, they're going to start a statewide campaign of .gov information is where you know to go for trusted information. If you're seeing a .com, they clone my website and make it look like I'm putting information out that I may not be. And there's steps we can take to get that removed, but that takes time. And in an election, that could be dangerous. So if you see .gov, it's a trusted site. You can't get a .gov domain unless you go through the Department of Homeland Security for that access. And they have different criteria to make you lengthy, make sure that you are the election authority. So I believe that that is the next step then after we've all gone to .gov is to start saying if you're getting something from an election authority and it's not .gov, that's questionable. You should only be getting it from .gov sites. Those are the only trusted ones. We're not there yet. June 17th isn't here yet, so don't, if I send you an email, trust me that it's still, it's still valid, but that's the direction that they're moving with this legislation. The assessments, and all that, we were already implementing it. I believe everybody was.
I'm not sure everybody was. I think that may be why the requirement
Oh.
to have it. The majority of jurisdictions were, but I think one of the requirements to do that, and I want to echo John, I actually had the opportunity to go to DC in December in a roundtable group and talk about the program that Illinois put together, the Cyber Navigators. And he's exactly right. The states are all copying it. And, even if the state said that they had their own program and they were building it, as you listen to them, they were copying it. You don't want to call Secretary of State out there. They were definitely doing it. And Illinois is very, very lucky to have that program. I mean, I want to stress that we have great personnel. They have 5 different people scattered throughout the state. That's all they do. They work, and there's funding behind it too, which is kind of nice. One of the really nice things though that they've done is they've brought in a private network to, I don't know that they're everywhere yet, but they're moving into, last I know they were up over 80 jurisdictions, into every courthouse for the county clerks.
They are everywhere now.
Are they? Okay. Now, we're lucky in Peoria. I have an IT department that I work with, and we have a lot of security, and that's a big thing. But when you talk about a small jurisdiction, I always like to point out, like Stark, they've got 2 people in that office, and their IT person for the county may be a part-time person that comes in a couple times a month, kind of thing. They have all kinds of security built into their system now, and that is made possible because of the state cyber security program, the Cyber Navigator program, and the funding to bring in the Century Network directly into that building, so that their connection to the State Board of Elections is a private connection now. It's not going out over the web; it's a private connection, and that's a second component of that. The assessments are valuable. They're keeping you on your toes and things change. We also, and I don't know if John did that, It's not in the bill, but we took advantage of a physical security assessment with through the federal government that came in at no cost to us. They was a, I believe a former state policeman in ours, but so security is extremely important in Illinois, and I think we have some of the most we have the most forward thinking when it comes to security in Illinois, and the bill's just reinforcing a lot of that there. And like I said, there's also been funding, which is always nice to get that to pay for.
I know too, it seems silly. Are you really thinking the Russians are looking at Tazewell County? The 2016 incident, the county they broke into is smaller than Tazewell County. The county they broke into is much smaller than Peoria County. And they broke into that county, and because it was connected to the state for voter registration, that's how they got into the state. So they weren't looking at the state of Illinois, they were looking at a county a little smaller than our county. We are the target. Because they figure that the big boys, Chicago and DuPage and all them, they've got a huge budget for this stuff. So that's where that's where we're not gonna go. We're gonna go where the budget might not be as big, but they've still got a lot of information. So counties our size, that we've been told, are the prime target for these multiple national, it's not just the Russians, there are multiple nations that are launching these attacks. They change all the time. I mean, the list we get on a weekly basis is amazing to read of what all is going on. So an information sharing item, I'm glad you brought that up, because again, I praise it every time I get a chance. I know Tom, you've heard him here doing the same. It really is something fantastic that the State Board of Elections has led the charge on doing, and it's wonderful that we're in Illinois, the gold standard that everybody's looking to now and trying to replicate.
Well, my question is, so does the State Board of Elections pay for all the costs for the cybersecurity, or is is the Tazewell County Clerk's Office responsible as the election board?
Up to this point, almost all the costs have been carried by the state. Now the .gov, our transition to .gov has cost us some locally, but the .gov itself was free to us. It had been $500. That was there's been some costs locally to make that transition, but we still get yearly security grants that we can use some of that money for. So the nice thing is most of this has been paid for. What hasn't been paid for, there have been some grants to if you want to use the grants for that they're available too.
Are these grants from the state or the federal?
They're federal money, but they're through the state.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will say too, one difference between Tom and I's offices, we've benefited in Tazewell County that the county clerk is the election authority, and that all of the safeguards that we're doing on the election end, they just happen to roll right into the county government side as well, because we're all in the same system. So every safeguard that we've added, that we put in place, hasn't just been for elections, but it's been for all of the county government computers, all of the county board systems, everything that's touched it. So we really have enhanced Tazewell County government systems protection across the board. And that's only because the election authority is located in our office. We couldn't do that if we were outside.
But actually ours is the same.
We're still under the
yeah, we're still in the umbrella. We have working with intergovernmental agreement with the county. We're basically part of the county, so all that security is inside it. And honestly, in a couple locations, in a couple instances, we've drugged the rest of the county forward with that. But no, we're under the county for IT support, so everything's sitting. All the county computers are sitting behind the same wall that they have built there because of that.
I didn't know how your system was set up, so I didn't want to speak on that.
No, it's
the benefit of that then is, while this is election safeguarding everything that's held by the county, which is, it's just not elections they're targeting. They want to cause chaos everywhere. So this has really been a wonderful chance to upgrade our systems and be the leaders.
One little thing I wanted to touch on with a few minutes left is this bill also requires high school to provide voter registration information to students and requires them to allow nonpartisan voter registration activities on site. And John, you mentioned you thought this was a good idea because it's a way to recruit more election judges, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Tom speak on that one, but It's a requirement that we do this, so the state's gonna provide the information to the election authorities, and then we'll pass it to the schools. We're also gonna include them for all of the high school students a plug about becoming an election judge, try to use it as an opportunity. We do outreach to the schools already, but if we're required to do more, might as well put some additional plugs in there. So yeah, we'll have a sheet in there, an informational sheet about how to sign up to be an election judge, what the requirements are, and see if we can grab a few more student election judges.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hit or miss working with some schools. Some of the schools, we've done these drives before, and we've had improvements. Other schools, we weren't as successful in working with. The nice thing about the bill is now they don't have the option to say no. I mean, and most of them didn't, but we ran into resistance sometimes because it's not, if it's not their mandate to do, sometimes it's way further down the list. And we understand that, but it allows they have to provide those to the students, and then they have to let us in there to do drives. And I think that's, I think it's another way to reach out. And we've had a lot of success with student election judges. And we like student election judges, a lot of high school students. We've had a few college, but we really like the high school students. They saved us in March of 2020. We had something like 80% of our judges back out because COVID hit, and the schools closed the day before the election, and we were training students the day before the election and teachers, and it really was we were able to pull off the election primarily because we were able to recruit those students and some of their teachers at the last minute. And the students, they may look really bored at 5 a.m., but at 8 o'clock at night, they're not exhausted. It's almost and also when you set an electronic poll book in front of them, they're not scared at all.
Right.
So.
I remember my son did it, my youngest son, when he was in high school, and he was definitely the youngest one by generation.
Yes.
I was just gonna comment if we could go back just a minute. Tom had mentioned something earlier in the program I thought was important to highlight. I didn't want the opinion to be left out as just Tom that I supported as well. He had mentioned his thought that the state, and I echo it, I think they will as well, move in the future, I think within the next 10 years, to vote centers rather than precinct polling locations. And I just didn't want that left out there as if that was, I agree with my colleague, I think that is where we'll go. And using this spot as a location, just think about it. Precinct design was made up when Caterpillar's manufacturing buildings were here. And everybody that worked in those buildings lived around the plant. And that's the shop, the grocery store was right there as well. And they weren't transit, they didn't go anywhere. They went to work, they came back home, and that's the model that precincts are made of. I live in Washington. I work all day in Pekin. Why can't I vote in Pekin as long as I'm within the county? And that's the idea of vote centers, is go to the polling location that's closest to you within that jurisdiction and vote there. And I think there are ways that we can enhance some security with, Tom mentioned electronic poll books. We can be more advanced in that direction if we had more funding, and we can do that by reducing precinct neighborhood polling locations and doing vote centers that I think could handle larger crowds. So I want to echo my colleague, and I didn't want it to be left as if you were hanging out there on your own. I'm with you. I think that is the direction we will head in the future. Not us, the state will have to make that decision, but we're just more of a transient society than we used to be when these neighborhood polling location model was made. I do think though that there'll be vote centers will be the in-person way to vote. I don't see us moving away from in-person voting as much, but that's a possibility as well. But I think at least our county still wants in-person voting. That doesn't have to be in your backyard. It can be where you're on the common drive that you make already to work.
Yeah, and look, I think we're already down that road. We talk about election day a lot, but election day in Illinois is the last day you can vote. You can start voting 40 days ahead of time. If you're voting by mail, we can mail you about 40 days ahead of time. We talked about the last day to register to vote. It's election day. Ironically, in Illinois, the only 2 days you can't register to vote are the 2 days after election day. Every other day you can register to vote or change your address and vote. So we're already starting down that path. We've already fundamentally changed elections. I started in 2006. That was the first year we had early voting in the state of Illinois. We went to no excuse absentee voting in 2010, and then they changed the name to vote by mail in 2012. This election will be the first time that you can sign up for permanent vote by mail, and so we're already down that path. I don't know that you can come back and stop it. When I talk to people around the country about voting, we have, some states have vote by mail, some states have a lot of early voting, and there's still some states that are primarily election day. And I look at them and said, we're all of those, which is not an inexpensive way to run an election. I mean, we have to gear up to run a full election for our early voting locations, and we have up to 12 for 2 weeks. I mean, our office for 40 days, but we spent about 16 days doing early voting. We have to gear up for a large number of vote by mail ballots. One of the nice things I think that we'll see on the permanent is it'll give us some idea, planning wise, how many you're going to have, because when you go from, we went from 11,000 to we mailed out over 30,000 in 2 years. That's a massive jump, and you have to handle that volume differently. So the permanent will be nice. We'll at least have that idea of how many there are going into that election. And we're always going to have election day, but I think it's important to understand that that's the last day you can vote. It isn't the end of the election, though. I think we're also starting to see that. The election isn't official until 15 days after the election. I think most of the people in the city of Peoria understand that. We've had several close elections that didn't finish on election night, but that's also a change that I think has happened. We've always had close elections, and we've always had elections go late, but with the increase in vote by mail, I think that's going to continue too.
And Tom mentioned some numbers earlier, I mentioned some numbers. For the state of Illinois in 2020, 33% voted on election day, 33% voted early before election day in person, and 33% voted by mail. Tom's mentioned his vote by mail numbers were much higher than where I was. In Tazewell County, we had 52% on election day. We had 29% vote in person early, so using our offsite early voting opportunities in person, and then 21% only voting by mail. I don't think in Tazewell County I'll see vote by mail increase drastically again. I think it might actually take a tick back, but I think in person early voting will tick up because people got used to it. They're like, wow, this is okay. I don't have to wait in November for a snow day on election day. Fight the snow, I can do it on a nice, okay, I'll do it that way. So I think in person, they still want to be in person, but that vote early opportunity they like. So I think we'll see that continue to rise. Not that vote by mail is going to go down again. I'm just saying, I think it'll take a little bit back, but it's not going to go back to the way it was 4 years ago.
I think in the next probably 8 years, we're going to see adaptive ways that we vote, but it's going to be in response to how people do vote. I mean, Peoria County was one of the leaders in early voting on a percentage basis for the first few years, and what we found is that people, once they started to vote early, they liked voting early, and we didn't lose a lot of those. But what we see in the last couple elections is the vote by mail has eaten into the early voting. I throw 2020 out because the pandemic was a big shift, but yeah, we're seeing elections evolve.
Yeah.
Okay, before we close, and I'd like to announce some upcoming events, is there anybody who has any questions about the new voting laws that have taken into effect?
I had one question that you can answer briefly, quickly. Someone who's been arrested and not convicted of a crime, how do you handle that in Peoria County or in Tasman?
So, well, as long as they're not convicted, they can register and vote. If they're being held pre-trial, we have gone out to, that's where we work with the sheriff's office, and we typically get a list from the sheriff's office of the people that are registered. We have gone out and did registration there, or groups have gone out and done registration. We typically deliver those ballots to the jail 3 or 4 days before the election, and then we get them back typically the day before the election. So as long as they haven't been convicted, if it's pre-trial detention, then they can vote. Once they're convicted and being confined, in terms of incarcerated, which used to mean that you were in jail, now it means you may be in jail or release or halfway. So it gets a little tricky on there, but pre-conviction, you can register and vote in Illinois. And then once you're no longer incarcerated, you can register and vote in Illinois. I think a lot of people, and that's different state to state, so that gets a little tricky when they talk about, well, somebody who was a felon voted in one state and that's illegal. That may be illegal in that state, but that isn't necessarily illegal in Illinois.
It's the same standard we use in Tasman County as well.
This isn't necessarily about the law, but it's about the processing of ballots after election day. So with the increase in vote by mail and drop off, I think about was it the mayor or was it the at-large, where you had a pretty significant amount of election in Peoria, ballots that were processed afterwards. Like, what's the process? How do you handle that? So do you know how many are, like, when you pull them out of the box on election day, do you count that night to say, I've got 500 ballots there, we'll process them over the next 8 days, as well as the vote by mail that come in?
Yeah, so we typically know how many we have outstanding, and we know how many we have in-house. We have run into issues, and last spring was one of them. We have not quite to this level in 2020. We have staffing issues, and when I say staffing issues, typically we have some judges in our office on election day, but we ran into a situation where the judges we wanted to have in our office were in polling places because we were short-staffed. So we did process ballots the day before, but we were not able to process very many of the ballots on election day that we wanted to. Typically we will, and that's the plan going forward. But we had made counts when we were emptying our drop box. We'd made counts, and we were making counts when the ballots come back in. As soon as they come into our office, the actual envelope that the ballot's in is scanned, and so we have a count of that, and then they're checked in by a team of judges, bipartisan judges. In our system, they don't actually touch the ballot. They just are looking at signature images that we've captured on a scanner. But yeah, we know how many ballots we've collected. We know how many ballots are outstanding. Well, I guess it won't be Chris Kerrigan now, but I always got that call from Chris about 7:30 on election night. How many are outstanding? Because that, at the end of the night, if you're 1,000 ballots, if you're 1,000 votes away, it doesn't matter if there's 300 outstanding. If you're 100 out, then it does matter. So that's a question, and we do track that number. We track it on a daily basis when it comes back, and we track the drop boxes too.
Process is very similar in Tazewell County, except we have an election team judge that actually opens it up the envelope and processes the vote. So the day we receive it, they're putting it into the tabulator. So it is before election day. All that vote by mail count has already been counted. It has the results aren't known. We haven't pulled the tabulator strip to know the results, but we do that. First thing we put through our machine is the election judge count, or the vote by mail count, and the early vote count ahead of time. And then each day when they come in, we don't have judges every day processing. We wait until we get a large supply in those couple weeks after the election, and then we have an election judge team come in and they work the vote, process the vote through. And then we wait until we do the canvas to actually release the final total, unless we haven't had an incident of it, but unless there was a case where we thought an election could be decided one way or the other by that, then we could call election judges.
You will.
We will. Thanks for cursing me. This time I'll get it. So
no, I mean, our process has been every 2 days to count after the election. We have an issue with if there's a challenge, there's a requirement for notification. So we've done it every 2 days. And what I meant is if you have something really, really close, they're not going to let you wait 2 days. The final result. Trust me, you will have lots of visitors in your office wanting to watch you count ballots. So.
Okay, Well, I want to thank both of you very, very much. I think this is very informative, and hopefully you will tell people that it will be on the Leaks YouTube channel later on. And also, how do you access it through the library?
We would just be directing them to where it's posted.
Okay, so they can, if they go to the Fond du Lac Library website, they can find it.
It'll be, like, we shared the event on our Facebook and things like that, so, but we would be directing to where, Eastside is posting it and the league is posting it.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I think I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague as well, but I want to express my gratitude as the League of Women Voters and to the library for hosting this. You did this for us last time, in the 2020 election. I heard from voters consistently how it provided clarity to the confusion that was out there of what all the new laws meant. I think you've done exactly the same thing tonight. Hopefully that's the result. You feel like you've got clear answers from us on what exactly we do. We want to be as transparent as we can about how the process goes. We always encourage, I know I do, and I believe my colleague does as well, encourage everybody, if you have questions, give us a call, contact us. But thank you very much for hosting this. It's very much appreciated, so thank you.
But I want to echo John on that too. There's a lot of value to allowing us to sit up here and talk about the process, because a lot of the concern in the public when it comes to elections is driven by not understanding the process. And I think anytime we get a chance to sit there and answer questions about it, it's great. And I will put this plug in that we always put in there. If you do have questions about elections, we'd love you to be an election judge, and we'll train you all the time. Because what we found is the more you know, the more confidence you have in it, especially when you're part of the process. And we can always use election judges. I think it's rewarding. Less rewarding 16 years into it than it was the first few years. There's a real sense of accomplishment in watching the election, and I think it will put your mind at ease when you do see those processes. The level of detail that goes into elections and making sure that they're done correctly and right and accurately and fair.
Thank you. Well, thank you both very much. And Gina and the Fond du Lac Library, thank you very much for being so wonderful and providing this great space and helping us find a whiteboard and everything to go with it. And so before I leave, I'd just like to make an announcement about events that the league has coming up. First, on April 23rd, we have a voter registration at the Peoria Library North Branch, and is it from 10 to 2?
It's from 11 to 2, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, voter registration and a volunteer fair.
Okay. And then after that, on May 3rd at 7 p.m., we are hosting the 17th Congressional District Democratic Primary Forum, and it's going to be held at the Global Communications Center, room 126, on the Bradley University campus. If you're not able to attend, WCBU will broadcast this forum live on 89.9, and then the Peoria Public Radio will also live stream it on their Facebook page. Then on May 14th, 2022, at 11 a.m., there is the 87th Illinois House Republican Primary Forum at the North Branch Library in Peoria, which for those of you who don't know, it's at 3001 West Grand Parkway, or as I like to say, next to Menards. And this also will be live streamed on the League's YouTube channel. Again, on May 14th at 12:15, right after that, is the 93rd Illinois House Republican Primary Forum. Then on May 16th at 6 p.m. is the 105th Illinois House Republican Primary Forum. That will be at Beverly Manor School in Washington, and that will be live streamed on the League's YouTube channel. On May 18th at 6 p.m., the Peoria County Sheriff's Republican Primary Forum will be held again at the North Branch Library and will be streamed on the League's YouTube channel. And then last but not least, on June 1st at 7 p.m. is the 17th Congressional District Republican Primary Forum that will be live on Zoom. So, hope everybody can attend these either in person or by watching them live streamed, and, thank you again.